Lecile Webster was born into a modest family in Fort Smith, Arkansas in January 1922, just weeks after the passing of Abdu'l-Bahá. Her life of service spans the 100 years since. She is a model of steadfast, constant, and heroic service to the faith of God. She rose from the humble beginnings and, transformed by the spirit of Baha'u'llah, became a career diplomat serving in countries all over the world, and her retirement opened further paths of service. To this day, she is always teaching, and she is always busy serving.
Her association with the Baha'i faith begins in Cleveland, Ohio, where she moved after the war to attend college. This decision changed the course of her life.
I went to Mabel Perry's house looking for a place to stay, and a friend took me there and said, "Oh, you have to go there to the Perrys and say they belong to a funny religion, but you don't have to get mixed up with that."
When Lecile walked into Mrs. Perry's living room, she was struck by a picture on the piano of an elderly man in a white turban. She could not take her eyes off of it and asked, who was the gentleman? A week or so later, Mrs. Perry was hosting a Baha'i meeting in her home and invited Lecile to join them for prayers and refreshments. That evening, she met an integrated group of folks, including 3 or 4 Black women. It was not long before she herself declared her belief in Baha'u'llah.
During her 8 years in Cleveland, Lecile frequently took a bus to visit Davison Baha'i School, now Lou Helen, where she studied with many stalwart early believers. At that time, Davison was still a farm, and she remembers eating in the farmhouse with Lou and Helen Eggleston and sleeping in the barn.
Yes. It was in the old days where we had to sleep in the same barn with the cows. We slept upstairs, of course, downstairs, and then we had to come downstairs past the cattle out in the open and then walk maybe 15 or 20 minutes to the stream to wash our teeth and our faces, because there was no other place we could wash up before we could go into the main house and have breakfast. And that was the way Lou Helen was. It was a wonderful place.
In May of 1953, Lecile attended the dedication of the first Baha'i house of worship in the Western Hemisphere, located just outside Chicago. This proved to be another life-changing event.
At the dedication, Lecile met Abdu'l-Bahá Rihia Khanum, the wife of Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the Baha'i faith. She also learned of the 10-Year Crusade and the call for the believers to leave their homes and bring the message of Baha'u'llah to the remaining countries and territories of the world.
Back home in Cleveland, Lecile reflected, the guardian wants us to go pioneering. What can we do? Lecile gathered with 2 young friends and an older woman for 9 straight Saturday mornings to recite the tablet of Akhmat, that the doors would be open to them. Shortly thereafter, one of the young women, a podiatrist, pioneered to Canada. The second young woman with a degree in education went to Arkansas, and Lecile, still in college, was the last.
Lecile's prayers to pioneer were answered when she passed the Foreign Service exam and was invited to Washington, D.C. to work at the State Department.
I was the only Black in that recruitment in 1954, and I don't really think they knew that I was Black until I got there. Then, of course, they had to accept me.
Being Black, Lecile faced discrimination. Hotels were not open to her. She ended up staying in the dorms at Howard University. Even going to lunch with her colleagues was a challenge, as she was barred from eating at many restaurants. Her colleagues supported her and would not enter the restaurants without her.
I was kept in Washington for almost 6 months before I was given an assignment. And then I was assigned to Tokyo, one of the largest and better posts. When I got my tickets, I was amazed to discover I was traveling first class. I learned enough Japanese to get around in the city, and I could hear people's reactions to me without them knowing that I understood. And the first reaction was, isn't she tall? But I never heard any mention of my color. It was always my size. And then I would respond in Japanese, and they would practically turn handsprings and give me half the store.
Within the context of her work environment, Lecile found no overt discrimination, but rather a cool, hands-off attitude.
On weekends, I was left practically by myself. And if it had not been for the Japanese friends, I would have been a very unhappy, lonely person.
In Japan, Lecile discovered that her fluency in Japanese provided many opportunities to tell others about the Baha'i faith directly, without the assistance of a translator. She recalled that she was able to make friends with Japanese colleagues, and soon after arriving, spent more time with them than her American counterparts.
I had firesides in my apartment. I had about 20 Japanese professors coming to these firesides, and 5 of the Japanese came into the faith. So you can see, on one hand, it was the best thing not to be caught up in the social life at work. The primary goal was to teach the faith. That was my priority.
During her time in Japan, she attended the first International Teaching Conference in Asia in 1955.
At that time, the Guardian wrote to us in his own handwriting with instructions on what we were to do to hold our community together. The goal was to establish one national spiritual assembly for Japan, Korea, Hong Kong, and Macau. Specifically, the Guardian put much emphasis on the teaching work in Korea. He emphasized, under all circumstances, the foothold the faith has in Korea should be maintained and developed.
So again, Lecile stepped up. To better serve the faith, Lecile asked to be transferred to the hardship post of Korea. At that time, Hand of the Cause Agnes Alexander wrote to the Hands of the Cause in Asia,
Miss Webster's move is surely God's plan, as it came in answer to the prayer that she and Mr. Kadem said for her guidance.
When Lecile arrived in Seoul, she found the city still devastated by war.
When I looked as far as the eye could see, there was no tree, no blade of grass, nothing. Lecile shared, the Asian Teaching Committee instructed me to look for the one Baha'i they thought was in Seoul. The committee said he's Korean, his name is Kim, he lives on a hill, and he has dark hair and brown eyes. Well, Kim in Korea is like Jones or Smith here. As far as I knew when I landed, I was the only Baha'i in Seoul. I knew I was the first woman pioneer in Korea, and certainly the first Black pioneer, except for Bill Maxwell.
After weeks of prayer, Lecile was joined by another pioneer, Bill Schmitz. Together, they formulated a plan to find Kim. They would go to all the tea houses because that's where the Koreans would congregate to keep warm. With God's help, and after drinking umpteen cups of tea around the city, they actually did find Kim at a tea house and began holding firesides in his home, as well as starting groups for people to study the Baha'i writings. As a result, several Koreans became Baha'is, which soon led in 1956 to the formation of one of the first 2 Korean local spiritual assemblies. Lecile was elected to serve on that assembly. It was a groundbreaking victory for the faith. They were part of the 12 elected in the Northeast Asia area, and together they would form the local pillars to support the eventual regional National Spiritual Assembly. During her time in Korea, Lecile also had the opportunity to pray at the border between North and South Korea.
Can you imagine at the 30th parallel in North Korea, being able to say the word Baha'u'llah? That was my big wish once I got to Korea, is to get on the parallel and scream, Ya Baha.
After Korea, Lecile served in Mexico City and was again elected to a local spiritual assembly.
We had many firesides, and I'd have like 40 or 50 people in my apartment.
And then she went to Bolivia, where she was elected to the Spiritual Assembly of La Paz in 1960. During her stay in Bolivia, she fell seriously ill, and while recovering, went on pilgrimage to Haifa.
During that pilgrimage, Rahia Khanum invited Lecile to tea, and the two became quite close. When Lecile had first met Rahia Khanum at the beginning of the 10-Year Crusade, Lecile was a lovely young student, eager to serve. Responding to the call, in a mere 7 years, Lecile had transformed to an experienced diplomat, had served in Japan, Korea, Mexico, and Bolivia, and had used her months of vacation to travel teach in Hong Kong, Macau, Thailand, New Delhi, Iran, and Malaysia.
Rahia Khanum invited Lecile to accompany her to the upcoming dedication of the House of Worship in Uganda in January of 1961. Lecile said she had no clothes appropriate for the dedication. Rahia Khanum responded,
"Oh, go select something to wear from my closet."
After the dedication, she wanted Lecile to continue to be her travel companion, but reluctantly Lecile declined.
Lecile continued her foreign service career and was posted to Norway, where she was elected to the National Spiritual Assembly.
The only Black Baha'i in Norway, she was elected chairperson of the National Spiritual Assembly 2 years in a row.
At the culmination of the 10-Year Crusade in 1963, Lecile, as a member of that National Assembly of Norway, joined members of over 50 national spiritual assemblies from around the world to elect the first Universal House of Justice.
The following week, she was among the 6,000 Baha'is who attended the first Baha'i World Congress held in Royal Albert Hall in London, England, to present and celebrate the election of the first Universal House of Justice.
When she was back in Norway, Lecile appeared in the April 1965 edition of Ebony magazine and a landmark feature story about the Baha'is that attracted lots of attention to the faith from the Black community.
Drawing on her skills, Lecile was invited to Haifa to consult with the House of Justice on staffing plans at the Baha'i World Center.
Returning from her last foreign post in Paris, Lecile moved to Columbia, Maryland in the early 1970s. At her home on Footed Ridge, she hosted all but one of the early House of Justice members and their families on vacation. She also served on the International Goals Committee. She retired in 1976 and opened an international travel agency aimed at securing favorable rates for the Baha'is going on pilgrimage.
In the early 1980s, Lecile moved to Silver Spring, Maryland. She bought 2 condos back to back and connected them so the Baha'is could have large gatherings in her expanded living room. There, she hosted Rahia Khanum and Violet Nachavani. She also led a youth group. In addition to instilling them with the desire to teach and serve, she gave them practical skills, teaching them to manage their money, to save, and to invest. One parent was quite surprised to pick up their child from class and come upon a professional stockbroker advising the youth group.
To tell a teaching story, this is back in the early 90s. And since Arun's here, I'll mention him because he and I were together. The youth used to go to Great Falls and we have dawn prayers. And we go, okay, let's go to the D.C. Baha'i Center. So we go to D.C. Baha'i Center and we're sitting in the back. And then after this Sunday event, Lecile and Elsie Austin are sitting there, having refreshments, and are looking at Arun and I and several other youth. And she's going like, "Is that all you're going to do today?" Oh. Then Arun goes, yeah, let's go. I think we went down to the mall, Capitol Mall, and did some street teaching or something. Lecile was always that way. Is that all? Get busy.
In the 1990s, Lecile focused on securing a regional Baha'i property for the benefit of the entire Washington, D.C. area. She was tireless in motivating others to join in. During the search, whenever a candidate property was identified, she was always part of the group to go visit it. She organized the committee, inspired them, and was unrelenting when some wanted to give up.
When the 44 acres were finally secured on the shore of the Potomac River in Fort Washington, Maryland, overlooking the DC skyline, she was the champion fundraiser and cheerleader to get it paid for. Lecile was there supporting bake sales of cupcakes, raising a few dollars, to large dinners raising thousands of dollars. She never stopped.
After the land was purchased, Lecile served on the property task force, creatively organizing many events to bring people out to walk its paths and see its potential to serve the faith.
Not content to rest, several years ago, Lecile spearheaded an effort that secured a Baha'i section in Park Lawn Memorial Park in Menorah Gardens in Rockville, Maryland, and placed a 9-pointed star prominently at the main gate.
In January of 2022, Lecile Webster turns 100, heroine of the 10 Year Crusade, through whom the light of the Spirit shineth forth, establisher of the faith in Korea, elected to spiritual assemblies on 4 continents, and securer of the D.C. Regional Baha'i property for future generations. She is truly the embodiment of Baha'u'llah's teaching. Be unrestrained as the wind, while carrying the message of him who has caused the dawn of divine guidance to break. Consider how the wind, faithful to that which God hath ordained, bloweth upon all the regions of the earth, be they inhabited or desolate. Neither the sight of desolation nor the evidences of prosperity can either pain or please it. It bloweth in every direction as bidden by its Creator. So should be everyone that claimeth to be a lover of the one true God. It behooveth him to fix his gaze upon the fundamentals of his faith and to labor diligently for its propagation. Wholly for the sake of God, he should proclaim his message. Lecile, we love you and we are forever in your shadow.
Would you give your life to Baha'u'llah? Would you give your life to Baha'u'llah? Would you give your earthly possessions, your worldly desires, your whole life to Baha'u'llah? Yes, I'd give my life to Baha'u'llah.